Life in our neighborhood was supposed to be simple. Quiet streets, trimmed hedges, a sense of peace that people like us worked decades to finally afford. But peace has a way of attracting people who think they own it. For us, that person was the HOA president, a woman everyone called Karen. Behind her back, though she thrived on the title Madam President. She strutted around like a self-appointed queen clipboard in hand-enforcing rules that seemed more like personal whims than actual community bylaws. And then came the day everything snapped. It started with a letter slipped under our door, demanding a $25,000 renovation fee. Not a typo, not a joke, $250,000, supposedly to upgrade the neighborhood. Entrance, though, the breakdown, included things like decorative koi pond and even executive travel expenses. My wife read the letter out loud, then calmly said she's lost her mind. We laughed at first, until the threats started. Karen declared that failure to pay meant liens, property seizure, even forced sale. My wife refused, with fire in her voice. That refusal would become the trigger for the most outrageous HOA meltdown I've ever seen, because Karen didn't just send more letters. She called the cops, and when the officers showed up, instead of cuffing us, one of them suddenly snapped to attention and barked, "Yes, General, I promise you. You're not ready for how this played out." The neighborhood looked like something from a glossy real estate brochure. Cul-de-sacs lined with manicured lawns, kids on bikes, retired couples tending roses. On the surface, paradise. But under the surface, one woman's ego ruled it all. Karen had been HOA president for years, and she made sure everyone knew it. Her reign included everything from measuring grass with a ruler to fining people for leaving trash cans out 2 minutes too long. Some neighbors tried to resist. They either moved away or mysteriously fell in line. Should have seen the storm coming the day. My wife attended an HOA meeting. She didn't go often. She had more important things to do than argue about mailbox paint colors. But that night, Karen introduced her latest proposal, a neighborhood beautification fee that would supposedly increase property values. She presented it like gospel truth, waving glossy mock-ups of a marble entry gate, imported palm trees, and even a fountain shaped like herself. I'm not exaggerating. The room erupted. Half the neighbors gasped, half chuckled. My wife, she raised her hand and asked the question. Everyone else was too polite to say, "Who exactly is this benefiting, us or you?" That's when Karen's eyes locked onto her like a predator spotting prey. Fast forward a week, and that insane $250K invoice arrived at our door. It wasn't a community vote. It wasn't optional. It was an outright shakedown. We ignored it at first, figuring common sense would prevail. Instead, Karen escalated. Letters piled up. She plastered notices on our garage warning of legal consequences. My wife tore them down one by one. The final straw came one morning when we found a bright orange lien notice taped to our front window, visible to the entire street. It accused us of endangering the community by refusing payment. That's when my wife marched straight to Karen's house, knocked on the door, and said through clenched teeth, "You're not getting a dime. Take me to court if you dare." Karen didn't flinch. She just smirked, her pearls glinting in the sunlight, and said, "Oh, honey, you'll regret this." The very next day, 2 squad cars rolled up to our driveway. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, whispering. Karen stood at the curb, arms crossed, beaming like she'd just staged a coup. And as the officer stepped forward, notebook in hand, Karen pointed at us and declared, "Arrest them. They're defrauding this entire community." That was the moment the story took a turn none of us saw coming. Because the officer didn't look at us. He looked at my wife, then stiffened like a soldier on parade. And then came the words that froze the entire street. "Yes, General." The street went silent. Even the neighbor's dog, usually barking at passing squirrels, seemed stunned into silence. The cop's words, "Yes, General," hung in the air like a thunderclap. Karen's smug grin flickered. She tilted her head, clearly confused. "Excuse me," I said, "arrest them. They're refusing to comply with HOA bylaws." But the officer didn't budge. Instead, he stood at attention, shoulders squared, eyes fixed firmly on my wife. Now here's the part Karen never knew, and what most of our neighbors didn't either. Before she was my wife, before the quiet suburb, the gardening, the evening walks, she was colonel in the U.S. Army. And as of her retirement, she still technically held rank recognized by anyone who ever served under her chain of command. And wouldn't you know it, this officer had. He snapped into military posture, eyes locked, waiting for her orders. My wife, cool as ice, just raised one eyebrow and said, "At ease, officer." The crowd gasped. Karen sputtered. "What is going on here? I gave you a direct order." That was mistake number 1. Karen thought HOA rules outweighed federal service codes. And if there's one thing you don't do, it's bark orders at someone who spent 20 years leading troops across deserts and war zones. The officer turned slow and deliberate. and said to Karen, "Ma'am, with respect, you are out of line." Karen's face went red. Her pearls rattled against her chest as she hissed, "Out of line, I am the line. This entire neighborhood runs because of me." You could hear neighbors chuckling now. A few even pulled out phones recording every second. But Karen didn't stop. She doubled down. That night we received no fewer than 5 separate violation notices. One claimed our grass was 2 shades darker than the approved green. Another said our mailbox leaned 3 degrees to the left. My wife laughed so hard she nearly cried. By the weekend, Karen had escalated further. She hired a private towing company to stalk our street. The second my wife parked slightly too close to the curb, they swooped in. Except they didn't realize she still had military base tags on her vehicle. When the tow truck hooked up, the officer from earlier happened to drive by. Within minutes, the tow driver was unhooking with shaky hands, apologizing like his life depended on it. Karen stood across the street shrieking that rules are rules while the neighbors filmed every second. And it didn't stop there. She started sending anonymous letters, or so she thought. Same handwriting, same stationery. Thinly veiled threats like, "You won't last here. Pay up or move out." One evening we came home to find our trash cans tipped over garbage, scattered like confetti across our lawn. Security footage? Yep. It was Karen herself sneaking across in the dead of night, with rubber gloves and a ski mask that barely covered her. Bleach blonde Bob. The next HOA meeting turned into theater. Karen stormed in waving a stack of evidence. Fake invoices, doctored documents, claiming the neighborhood had unanimously approved her $250K fee. She slammed them on the table, daring anyone to question her. My wife leaned back calm as ever and said, "That's not just a lie. That's fraud." The room buzzed. A few neighbors exchanged nervous glances. Some, emboldened by her poise, began whispering about audits, financial reviews, votes of no confidence. For the first time, Karen looked cornered. But like a cornered animal, she lashed out harder. The very next morning, we woke up to spray-painted words across our garage door, "Pay now or else." This time, the officer didn't just show up, he brought backup. Karen in her robe and slippers tried to play innocent, but neighbors poured out one after another, pointing, testifying, handing over video clips. Still she smirked, convinced she was untouchable. And that's when my wife leaned down to me, whispering words that sent a chill up my spine. "It's time we stop reacting and start planning." That was the moment the game changed. Karen thought she was fighting neighbors. She didn't realize she'd picked a war with a strategist who'd spent her life studying how to dismantle tyrants. The HOA. Queen was about to meet her match. For weeks, Karen had thrown everything she could at us. Bogus fines, vandalism, threats, even trying to weaponize the police. And each time my wife held the line with quiet strength. But that night, after the spray paint incident, she changed gears. We sat at the kitchen table, a yellow notepad between us. Steam rising from her mug of tea. Her eyes gleamed with the same focus she once had while planning operations overseas. "Karen thinks we're just homeowners," she said softly, tapping her pen. "But HOAs have bylaws, budgets, elections, and if she's bending the rules, we can expose it." That was step 1 information. My wife filed formal requests for financial transparency, copies of budgets, invoices, and meeting minutes. By law, Karen had to provide them. Days later, a crumpled folder appeared on our doorstep. Inside, a goldmine of sloppily kept records. Handwritten notes, unexplained withdrawals, and unbelievably receipts for spa trips and luxury handbags, all marked as community improvements. Step 2, allies. At the next HOA meeting, my wife didn't storm in or raise her voice. She came calm, composed, with a binder in her hand. One by one, she called out neighbors who'd been targeted. The family fined for painting their shutters. The retiree harassed for leaving wind chimes up. The single mom threatened over her kids. Chalk drawings on the sidewalk. Each of them nodded, voices trembling at first, then firm with anger. Slowly the tide shifted. People who once cowered under Karen's rule began standing taller. Step 3, exposure. We set up a projector in the community hall. As the lights dimmed, slides clicked one after another. Karen's spa receipts. Her executive dinners, her 1,000. Business retreat to Cancun. Gasps rippled through the room. Phones snapped photos. Whispers turned into outrage. Karen tried to shout it down. "This is a smear campaign. You people are too stupid to understand them responsibilities of leadership." But the evidence was undeniable. And then came the cherry on top: video clips. My wife had quietly collected recordings from neighbors. Karen trespassing, yelling even, spray painting our garage. The room fell dead silent as her own voice hissed from the speakers. "Pay now or else." Karen's jaw dropped. Step 4, reclaiming power. That night, my wife announced a motion for a vote of no confidence. The neighbors, their anger now unified, raised hands one by one. Outnumbered, outshouted, Karen watched her empire collapse in real time. But the plan wasn't over yet. My wife had anticipated Karen's next move. Denial. Sure enough, Karen refused to step down. She screamed, threatened lawsuits, even called us traitors. So my wife pulled her final card. She'd already contacted the county inspector and filed a complaint with the state HOA regulatory board. By the time Karen stumbled home that night, red-faced and defeated officials were already reviewing her accounts. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt lighter. People smiled more. Kids chalked rainbows on the sidewalks without fear. My wife walked the street with her head high, no longer just the neighbor who said no, but the leader who gave everyone else permission to stand up too. Karen wasn't finished, not yet. She tried a few more tricks. Late-night emails, threats of suing the entire block. But with every move she made, my wife calmly countered. Paper trails, witnesses, regulations. Bit by bit, Karen's fortress crumbled. The final blow was poetic. The same officer who once snapped to attention on our lawn showed up again, this time not to follow Karen's call but to deliver official papers. Her misuse of funds reported. Her harassment under investigation. And standing on her porch clutching the letter with trembling hands, Karen caught sight of my wife across the street. Calm, smiling, unshaken. That was the moment it hit her. She wasn't running this neighborhood anymore. The morning of the showdown began like any other. Sunlight filtered through the blinds. Sprinklers ticked across lawns, and neighbors wheeled out garbage bins. Normal life, almost. But then 2 official county vehicles rolled into the neighborhood, followed by a squad car. Curtains lifted across the block like theater drapes. Everyone knew this was it. Karen burst out of her house in a silk robe, hair pinned high, clutching her clipboard like it was a royal scepter. She marched straight to the officials, shouting before they'd even reached the curb. "This is harassment. I am the elected president of this HOA. You have no authority here." The lead investigator, a tall man with a folder tucked under his arm, simply raised an eyebrow and opened it. Out came page after page of evidence receipts, video stills, financial statements. He read them aloud in a steady voice while the neighbors gathered, each accusation hitting like a drumbeat. Unauthorized expenditure, $10,000 for a resort in Cancun. Forgery of signatures on HOA meeting minutes. Personal threats and vandalism of homeowner property. By the time he got to fraudulent lien notices, Karen's face was beet red. She tried to snatch the folder from his hands, shrieking, "Lies, all lies." That's when the officer, the same one who had once called my wife General, stepped forward. Calm, almost ceremonial, he handed Karen a sealed envelope. "Ma'am, you are hereby removed from your position as HOA president pending investigation. You are not to conduct further business on behalf of this association." Silence. For a moment, even the birds seemed to stop chirping. Then came the murmurs. Neighbors whispering. Someone stifled a laugh. A kid down the block yelled finally, and everyone chuckled. Karen, trembling, clutched the envelope to her chest. She looked around, desperate for allies, but the crowd had already turned. Even the people who once feared her now stood, with folded arms, faces hard with satisfaction. My wife, calm as a statue, finally stepped forward. She didn't gloat, didn't raise her voice. She simply met Karen's eyes and said, clear enough for the whole street to hear, "This community deserves better. And from today, it gets exactly that." The officer gave a crisp nod in her direction. Not as a cop, but as a soldier. Recognizing rank, neighbors clapped. Some cheered. Phones captured the moment, flashes of justice going viral in real time. Karen, furious and humiliated, stormed back into her house. The door slammed so hard the windows rattled, but she couldn't slam away the truth. Within weeks, official audits confirmed what everyone suspected: she had siphoned tens of thousands of dollars from HOA funds. Civil charges followed. Her reign was over. And the neighborhood, it bloomed. Without Karen's grip, people painted shutters. Bright colors, kids sold lemonade on corners. Gardens flourished. The very order Karen claimed to protect was replaced with actual harmony. One evening, weeks later, a neighbor passed me on the sidewalk and said, "Your wife didn't just stand up to her. She freed all of us." I smiled, because he was right. Karen thought she could bully us into silence. Instead, she built the stage for her own downfall. In the end, our neighborhood didn't just lose a tyrant. It found its voice. The same streets that once felt patrolled by Karen's clipboard now felt alive again. People waved from porches, shared tools, planted flowers without fear of fines. The air itself seemed lighter. My wife never once bragged about what she'd done. That wasn't her style. She'd spent her life serving, quietly, leading firmly, and she treated this battle the same way. But I could see it in the neighbors' eyes. She'd become something bigger than just a homeowner who fought back. She was the proof that one voice, steady and unshaken, could dismantle years of intimidation. And here's what stuck with me most. Karen didn't fall because she was challenged with anger. She fell because she was challenged with truth. Paper trails, evidence, courage. not shouting matches or pettiness. In the end, she tripped over her own lies. It reminded me of something my wife once told her soldiers. Tyrants collapse the moment people stop bowing. So if you're watching this, ask yourself, what would you have done? Would you have stayed quiet hoping someone else would take the risk? Or would you have drawn the line and said, enough? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you've ever dealt with a Karen in power, whether in an HOA, a workplace, or anywhere else, share your story. You never know who might need the courage that comes from hearing it. And hey, if you made it this far, comment, justice served, so I know you stood with us all the way through. Because in the end, justice isn't just about laws or votes. It's about communities standing together and never letting one person's ego outweigh everyone else's peace.